Welcome to the Black Belt Husband Podcast. I'm your host, Quentin Hafner, licensed therapist, thought leading expert for men, and the creator of the Black Belt Husband System. This podcast exists for one reason: to train men to win in the one relationship that matters most, their marriage. If your relationship feels distant, if you're walking on eggshells, if nothing you've tried is working, you're not a failure, you just don't have the right blueprint. Inside this podcast, you'll learn the mindsets, tools, and frameworks to lead your home with strength, create peace in your marriage, and win back your wife's admiration and desire. Black Belt Husband is the step-by-step path to reclaim your power and transform your relationship. Let's get started. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Black Belt Husband Podcast. And today we are talking all about emotions, and specifically how emotions are probably harming your relationship and you might not even be realizing it, why feelings are helpful until they're not, and how to take back control of your feelings / emotions. I have Lucas here with me today. What's up, Lucas?
Hey guys, how's everyone doing?
Okay, so let's just give this podcast a little bit of a backdrop. Okay, so
Definitely.
there's a lot of cultural narrative around the concept of emotions, around the concept of feelings. And I even say that we live in a time in our culture that we tend to worship feelings. So we're told
Mhm.
things like trust your feelings, honor your feelings are valid, trust your gut. And while those sentiments are partially true, it can also be dangerously incomplete because although your feelings may be valid, there's a distinction that we have to really look at when it comes to being successful in relationships, is that your reactions to those feelings can destroy not only your relationship, but they can destroy your life. And so today we just want to do a podcast talking about self-regulation, talking about emotional regulation, talking about emotional health, what that really is, what happens when you don't have it, and how our emotions, for any of us, if they're left unchecked, can really hurt the success of your relationship.
I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite topics. I really think it's probably one of the most important skills that we can master. And it's a huge part of the black belt husband process. And honestly, kind of hits all 5 pillars. So, Quentin, you've worked with so many couples over the years. And, what do you see as the biggest misunderstanding people have about emotions?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Okay, and it kind of dovetails into what we were saying a little bit in the intro, and that is, in our modern culture in 2025, there is um, a sort of kind of like idolization of our feelings as a culture.
Mm,
Now,
mm,
I'm kind of painting this with a broad brush because it doesn't apply to everybody. But if we go back in time, if we go back like 100 years ago, um, we would have relied more as a culture. We would have placed a greater value on someone's cognition, someone's thought process. We would have considered people that were stoic to be, more valuable from a utilitarian standpoint, and that to almost to a fault. If we go back like 100 years ago, is that the concept of like emotions were kind of dangerous. People that were kind of emotional were not considered or not thought of to be of the highest value. And so I think over time, what's happened is that the pendulum, just like all movements in culture, the pendulum tends to swing too far. And we've moved into a time and culture where instead of people being more reliant on their perception and their thinking and really managing their emotions with like really good self-regulation, we've kind of created this like this this like kind of paradigm shift that says, hey, whatever you feel is true, whatever you feel is valid, kind of like it kind of emboldening people to just let their emotions fly. And inside the context of relationships, that's going to cause a lot of problems. Okay, because And this is something we say inside Black Belt all the time too, is we love teaching guys that relationships are really not rational. At the very core of all relationships is emotion. Okay, so we like to think of human beings as although we are rational creatures to a certain extent, I like to think of it as like the iceberg kind of picture. So what we see on the surface uh, of the iceberg might be something around our kind of like our intellect, our logical abilities, our rationale. And what we don't see that's underneath the surface is the tremendous amount of emotion. And so that's this kind
Mm.
of like subcurrent that is always running, it's ever present
Mm.
inside of a relationship.
Wow.
Now, and that's not a bad thing. Okay, that's a beautiful thing. That's how God has created his creatures. But we want to become really good at understanding and knowing how to manage that big iceberg underneath the surface. And we want to help people develop really two things, which is number one, lots of self awareness around what that iceberg is. How does that iceberg hurt us? How does that iceberg help us? And then the complementary trait to the self awareness is tons of self control. So when we get flooded with big emotions, when we're feeling super intense, we want to learn how to manage and how to regulate ourselves so we don't take all those emotions that are swirling inside of us and react to them to the detriment of our relationship. So I feel like that was a very long way to
It was a
talk
great
about.
answer. It was a great answer.
Okay, because you were asking is like, what's the biggest misunderstanding people have?
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest misunderstanding, if I was going to clarify it and simplify it, is that your feelings are your truth.
Hmm.
And we just want to say that that couldn't be further from the truth.
Further from the truth. Absolutely. Okay. So if that's further from the truth, then what's the real reason like these emotional states are happening? What's really going on? You talked about kind of those sub layers, those sub layers, the tip of the iceberg. People get
Hmm.
in these emotional states. Obviously, God gave us feelings and emotions for a reason. Can you dive in a little bit deeper to, what's really going on behind the scenes here?
Yeah. Okay. So let's run through maybe just a couple ideas about, what's really happening when it comes to emotions inside of relationships. So I already kind of alluded to this, but I just want to say it again because it's really important. So the self-help and the therapy industry, in my opinion, has really overcorrected in the context of helping people understand their emotions. So what we've done is we've gone from suppressing our emotions 100 years ago to idolizing our emotions today. And what people really want to find is that healthy middle space. We don't want to idolize our feelings. We don't want to say that our feelings are truth. We also don't want to suppress our feelings because that leads to a different
Hmm.
set of problems. So we
Hmm.
want to find the sweet spot in between where we're not suppressing them and we're not idolizing them. We're giving our emotions like the proper place where they should rightfully sit. Another thing is that people confuse feeling something, like feeling an emotion, with being right about it. And so that's kind of like what I was saying earlier is that people wrongly think that their feelings are truth. So if I feel really angry inside uh, my body or inside the context of my relationship with my wife, if I feel really angry, that doesn't mean that my anger is correct or that my anger is right. We want to challenge some of those belief systems that we have about our emotion. So because like for example, I might have that feeling of anger and the anger is kind of communicating to me that I've been wronged somehow inside of my relationship,
Mm.
but that may not be totally true. Okay, so I don't want to just take that feeling and assume that it's truth. I want to learn how to challenge the feeling, wrestle with the feeling, and find a little bit more stability instead of my life being dictated by those feelings. So another example would be like, just because I feel unloved doesn't mean that I am unloved. This happens a lot inside relationships where people say, I feel this way. And so because I feel this way, it must be true. It's like, well, it may not be true at all. It may not be anything close to the truth. So just because we feel that way doesn't mean that it's true. And we want to learn how to be very discerning, knowing how to distinguish what our emotions are telling us inside of our body and what is truth. Um,
Mm. And this really touches on pillar number two, you know, fight with yourself, not with your wife or your partner, right?
exactly, exactly. And we love hammering this point home with guys because we want to help, and not just guys. We love helping women with this too. Is that
Mm.
we want to help people learn how to fight with themselves. So the way the way that could happen in real life is that something's going on inside the relationship with my wife and I feel angry at her. I feel wronged that she did something. And so my natural tendency is to take that emotion that I feel and kind of direct it towards her, and it creates conflict. Okay. And so I could say things like, well, why did you look at me that way? Or why did you say that thing to me? Or why did you do that thing? So it's like, okay, we're going down the road of conflict. Okay. Because she's going to react to that probably in the same way. So the what we teach inside Black Belt, which is pillar number two, instead of doing that, I want to help people learn how to say, why do I feel this way? Where does this feeling really come from? Is this feeling really true? Right. So instead of fighting outward with my wife, I'm going to fight inward with myself, and I'm going to wrestle with myself to try and develop greater levels of self awareness because I don't want to just assume that the feeling is true. I don't want to just make the assumption that because my wife looked at me in a strange way that she is being X, Y, and Z. So that's too easy. So if we want to have really successful relationships, we can't take that easy path. We have to go inward and we have to start wrestling with ourselves and say, okay, well, my wife looked at me cross-eyed. So, and that made me feel a certain way. Why did I really feel that way? Where did that feeling really come from? And what can I do? How can I respond to that feeling in a really healthy way? So let me just add this point too, because I don't think I was going to talk about it, but it's just coming to me right now. It's so important. So a lot of times, this is really kind of piggybacking off pillar number two, is because a lot of times the things that we feel have nothing to do with the present circumstances in which we are associating that feeling. So, for example, if my wife looks at me cross-eyed and I feel enraged, okay, because she looked at me strange, well, that feeling of enragement may not have anything at all to do with my wife. It may have everything to do with a certain feeling that I felt as a little kid in childhood. And so this is the concept of projection. So I am projecting that old story, that old narrative, that old belief system of something that I experienced when I was really young, and I'm making the correlation that what my wife is doing today is related to that feeling inside me. And we have to learn that that is not often that is definitely not the case, especially when it comes to adult romantic relationships, marriage. That whenever we feel lots of big feelings, especially in the context of marriage, it's often associated with something from long ago, something from our past, and it has nothing to do with what the person is doing in the moment. But then this gets really confusing for people because they say, well, my wife said that thing, then I felt that thing. So we're making this kind of like causation understanding. But in reality, so the way we want to help people understand that is that we have to look at it like, does the punishment match the crime? So if my wife looks at me cross-eyed and I fly into a fit of rage, well, the punishment's not matching the crime. That emotion is much bigger than what she did. So that's how we help people understand that we want our emotional reaction to be proportionate to the event that we're experiencing. And what you'll find inside your relationship is that a lot of times, and I will even go as far to say is most times, when we're feeling something really big inside of our relationship, if we're really honest with ourselves, it's not proportionate to the event that we are associating it with.
Mm.
Does that kind of make sense? Does that track?
Yeah, 100%. That's so, so good. And I feel like, I mean, we've been there, we're in these conversations every day, every week. And it happens, you're busy with work, kids, family, right? Like, managing our emotions and being in control of ourselves is a huge part of the black belt husband process. So, so I love how you're saying, essentially emotional health doesn't mean suppressing what you feel, especially as men, right? We're trying to feel more and get in touch with that. It really means leading yourself through it. So, for all our listeners, the guys listening, what is the black belt husband 3-step framework to regulate your emotions and be in control of yourself, especially when your fuse is short?
Mm, yeah. Okay. So what we teach inside Black Belt is we have a three-part system that we help people if they're kind of flooded with emotions. Okay. So there's just three steps. So step number one is we just say you have to pause. Okay. And what pausing is, it's basically using time as our friend to take a break and to create distance between the emotion that we feel and the action that we're going to take. So I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. This doesn't really happen as much with them at this age, but when they were a little bit younger, we used to, like, when they would have lots of big feelings, we would say, okay, let's take a time out. Let's take a time out. Let's recalibrate. Let's take a break. Because like I see that you picked up that baseball bat and you want to whack your brother in the head for, knocking over your Legos. I totally get that. But let's take a break. Let's put the bat down. And we want to use time as our friend. Okay. So, what we're doing is that we're creating this gap between emotion and reaction because we know that that's where maturity lies. Okay. And so if we want to be mature, I know everybody listening to this wants to be mature. We want to be successfully mature in the relationship. And this is where maturity lives. We have to create that gap between what I feel and what I do. Okay.
Mm,
Because the point there is understanding that emotions or feelings, they're simply just signals. Okay. They're signals that are producing data. Okay. They're not commands. Like they're not directives that we need to do anything with it. Okay. So just because I feel something doesn't mean I need to react to that feeling. And the more space that we can take or give ourselves between what we feel and our behavior, the more successful we're going to be in a relationship. Now, this is a little bit, believe it or not, it's a little bit countercultural because we live in a culture that says your feelings are truth and you need to kind of do something about the way that you feel. If you feel something, it must be true. So we have to react to it. And that sets people up for failure because we don't have to look very far to see. I mean, very, very sadly and very unfortunately, the prison system is filled with people who weren't able to create that gap. Okay, that they felt something in a fit of rage, in a fit of anger, and they responded to it in a certain way that ended up kind of destroying their life and landed them in prison. So that's kind of like, that's the kind of archetypal picture of what happens because there's lots of different prisons. We could be in a relational prison too. We could be in a marital prison if we don't know how to create that pause between what we feel and reacting to it. So that's the first part of the three-step framework is just a pause.
And are there any specialized tips for if you're in the heat of the moment, you're having an uncomfortable conversation with your wife, your kids, having a meltdown, because I know the brain works in these millisecond patterns, but is there any just like specialized tools for our guys if they're in the moment of conflict to help them remember to pause or
Yeah. So, okay. So, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. So, I think number one is that we have to be honest with ourselves about certain scenarios that are going to be very difficult for us. Okay. So,
Mm,
if like the bedtime routine, I mean, this is my story right now because like bedtime routine at our house is like a total disaster. And so,
mm,
if I'm going to lose my patience and snap at my kids, it's going to be probably
mm.
somewhere between 6 o'clock and 8:30,
Totally. I get that.
And so I want to have that kind of self-awareness leading into between 6 and 8:30, like, okay, this is going to be a really hard time.
Mm,
Okay, so I want to do some good breathing. I want to feel relaxed. I want to
mm,
have really a good self-talk going on inside my head. Like, hey, you can do this. You got this. Okay, like just try to be patient, right? So I want to be as thoughtful as I can leading into that moment, like through kind of the inner dialogue that I'm going to be having with myself, and that's going to set me up for success. But what a lot of people do is they just kind of wing it. They just kind of like they forget that thing is going to be really challenging for them, and they just kind of go into it without that like self preparation. So I think the more that we can understand where are those trigger moments for us, where are the scenarios? Because what if you look at your life, you'll see that there's a very clear pattern in the moments where you get triggered. It might be, it's going to be different for everybody. For me, it's like the bedtime routine with my kids. For other people, it might be when they initiate sex with their partner and the partner says they don't want to.
mhm,
Or for other people, it might be, I said I was going to come home at 5:30 for dinner and I didn't get home till 6:30. So if we look at our lives, there's because we the things that we get upset about, the things that become really emotionally dysregulating for us are typically the same thing over and over and over again. So if we just have awareness what that pattern is, we're going to set ourselves up for success. So for everyone listening to this, spend some time and think about that. Okay, think about it's like where are the hot spots for you? Because if you spend a little time thinking about it, you'll see exactly where they are.
super helpful. Yeah, super good. Okay, awesome. So, step one, we have the pause. What's step two, and how does it work?
Okay, so step two, so first one is pause. Step two, we say process. Okay, process. So what we're doing is we kind of like in pillar number two of the Black Belt Housing System, we want to go inward with it. Okay, so we want to say like, what is this emotion, and what is this emotion telling me? Okay, so I want to try to understand this emotion. So for example, if it's 7 o'clock and I'm trying to get my kids ready for bed and they're being kids and they don't want to get ready for bed, I'm starting to get really irritated. Okay, so I want to pause and then I want to process. I would say, okay, why am I getting irritated? What is this feeling really about? Now, this goes into understanding the difference between primary emotions and secondary emotions. And we don't have time to teach this right now, but it's understanding the difference between my irritation and my anger versus what's really below that feeling is typically some kind of fear or hurt. Okay. So the way I like to teach people is I say that anger doesn't really exist in isolation, and that anger is a derivative emotion of something else, typically of either hurt or some kind of fear. Okay, so I'm afraid of something or I feel hurt by something. Okay, and when we can understand what that secondary, or excuse me, when we learn how to understand what that primary emotion is, that everything starts to really make sense. Okay, so for me, if I'm getting really irritated at my kids, it's because I'm exhausted and I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to get to bed on time. And so I become very impatient trying to control them, trying to force them into behavior because I'm feeling something, I'm feeling my own sense of anxiety, but the anxiety is getting manifested as anger, impatience, and
Mhm.
irritation. Okay,
Right.
so we want to try to help people make that connection. Like there's this big emotion that I'm feeling that's on the surface, but there's even a bigger emotion that's underneath the emotion that we can see, and that's really the processing. So another example is that if if I go to ask my wife, I say, hey, I want to have sex tonight, and she's like, no, I'm tired. Okay, and then I feel myself getting really angry. Well, it's like, what is that anger? It's not really anger because it's really rejection, and I
Hmm.
feel hurt and I feel rejected, but that would be very vulnerable for me to say that. So instead of being vulnerable, I move up the ladder into this defensive position where I become angry and irritated that she said no. So when it comes to processing, we're trying to make the connection between primary emotions and secondary emotions. And when we start understanding those primary emotions, um, everything just starts to click and make sense inside of our relationship.
Mm. And I love that. I love the way you phrase it too. It's just asking that question, that self-awareness. What is this emotion telling me?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to, look at that secondary and then go deep into the primary response. And this can be a big game changer in those moments, rather than responding out of anger, to take that pause. And you
Mm-hmm.
and you can and it really shows that black belt husband leadership we talk about in pillar number one, where you can set the tone and the temperature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
avoid potential conflict,
Exactly.
arguments,
Exactly. The tension. Yeah. Avoid all
tension,
that. Yeah.
disconnection.
Well, let me just add something to that too, because we talked a little bit earlier about how a lot of times our feelings are something from our historical past, typically family of origin, and we are projecting those onto our spouses. And I said the punishment doesn't match the crime. Okay, so if my
Hmm.
wife says no to having sex with me and I feel myself getting into a fit of rage, that's another good example of how that feeling has nothing to do with her saying no. That there was probably a time in my past when I was young where I experienced rejection at a very painful level and I didn't know how to make sense of it. I didn't know how to process it. The people in my life didn't help me with it. And so you can kind of think about it like we have this kind of bodily memory of rejection that's kind of stored inside of our body. And so when my wife says no, and she is rejecting me, but I have this really big reaction to the rejection, that's a sign that it's something from the past. Okay, so just for listeners to kind of be aware of that, because we also just don't want to make the assumption too, because we could help people say, okay, well, I feel rejected. Okay, cool, you feel rejected, and I feel rejected because you say no to sex. Well, that's like partially true, okay? But what's probably even more true is that those really big feelings that you have are
Hmm.
coming
Hmm.
from an old historical place, and your wife is just kind of reenacting something with you right now that's not really about the present moment.
And that can be a really hard thing to dive into, especially the older you get, the more the pattern forms.
And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of maturity to admit that some of these old
Mhm.
feelings are from the past because we don't like doing that. We like
Yeah.
saying, "No, I feel this way because of what you did,"
Yeah.
because it
Right.
makes us feel justified and we feel
Yeah.
entitled to feel
Hmm.
this way, but we're not
Hmm.
entitled to feel this way. Okay. And I'm saying you're not entitled to feel that way because you're not entitled to have a great relationship. Having a great relationship is a privilege, it's something that you have to
Mm.
create. It's something that you have to work towards. And so, if you want to have a great relationship, you have to fire yourself from feeling privileged and entitled to
Mhm.
feel a certain way.
That's really powerful. Okay, so before we wrap up here, step number three, to kind of land the process.
Okay, so we said pause, process, and the third step is proceed. Okay, so basically, what we're trying to get people to do is like, okay, so I gave myself a timeout. I didn't react to it. I used some self control, and then I spent some time thinking about like what this feeling really is about. Now, what do I want to do with it? Okay, so now I can proceed with the emotion. I can choose how I want to respond. Okay. I can decide, do I even want to bring this up to my wife? Is this a really important issue? Or is this kind of like, oh, I thought this was a real big issue, but now that I've kind of worked it out within myself,
Hmm.
it's not that important. I don't need to
Yeah.
bring it up. Okay. So we're learning to take all the feelings that we're feeling. And then from a behavioral response standpoint, we want to do things that are going to align with our values. Okay, and so if our value is I want to have a successful relationship, great. So then I'm going to respond to my wife in a way that kind of promotes that value. So if she says no to sex, I could say something like, "Hey, I totally respect that you don't want to have sex tonight, and that's totally fine. I just want to let you know that I feel these big rejection feelings when you say no." And I'm not even asking you to do anything about it. I just wanted to share that with you. So
Hmm.
you could do that, or you
Great.
could not say anything at all and kind of work it out yourself. You could also do that too. What you can't do if you want to have a successful relationship is you can't freak out and you can't pout and you can't stonewall and you can't be a martyr, and you can't do any of those things, okay? Because that would be the opposite of having emotional regulation and having
Mhm.
great emotional reactivity, okay? So in the third step, when we are in this place of proceeding, the basic premise here is that we are being very thoughtful and intentional about what do we want to do with that feeling and how do we want to respond to that feeling. Okay. So
Mhm.
so we're not being reactive, we're not being impulsive. We're being proactive and we're being responsive. Okay. So this is where we get to kind of like use lots of good self-control and do things that are going to promote the success of the relationship instead of throwing a grenade inside of our marriage by letting our emotions run the show.
And it really doubles down on pillar number 4, take responsibility for yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's why like the black belt husband system is so comprehensive because it touches just on everything. Exactly. So in pillar number 4, we're basically saying take responsibility for yourself. Take responsibility how you're going to proceed. Okay? Like you are in the driver's seat. You get to decide if you proceed in a way that is detrimental to the relationship, well, then you're just going to have to own that, right? So you,
Hmm.
you can't blame anybody else for that. You can't say, well, you made me. It's like, no, nobody made you. So we want to take full ownership of our thoughts, of our feelings, and our reactions.
And the other thing I see a lot too is when there's a lack of emotional regulation in marriage with your wife, you lose all credibility with her.
She doesn't trust you.
She doesn't trust you. She doesn't feel safe.
No, she doesn't
Uh,
feel safe.
There's no emotional safety, and you can't even get your point across.
Right, right.
So,
And also, I want to make a kind of a point too, because I know that we're talking about I think we're using examples that kind of illustrate the guy who kind of is freaking out. There's also the guy who shuts down,
hmm
and he's also unsafe.
hmm
Okay, so to suppress your feelings is not a better solution. So I don't want people to walk away from this thinking like, okay, yeah, I don't have big emotional reactions, so I'm doing great. No, you're not doing great if you're suppressing. Okay. So remember, we said in the beginning, we don't want to suppress and we don't want to be impulsive. We want to find that place in the middle where we have lots of control over how we're going to choose to react to our
hmm
feelings because suppressing our feelings is just the opposite side of the same coin of like getting enraged and blowing up.
Absolutely. And black belt husbands are self-aware, self-control, and control of themselves,
Hmm.
and self-regulated.
Exactly. And if we have those things going on in a relationship, it's almost like we can't lose. We cannot miss.
You cannot. Your wife will respect you and love you and feel so safe and cherished and seen and valued, and you will create the marriage you want.
Okay, so Lucas, what is the call to action for these guys this week listening to this? Or gals, if you're listening to it, you can jump on too. So what should we do?
Sure. Okay, so this week, this is our challenge to you. The next time you feel a wave of emotion come up in your nervous system, in your heart, in your mind, you want to lash out or you want to avoid and shut down, take the pause. Take the black belt husband pause. Take the pause, and gentle reminder. Sometimes even I'll put my hand on my heart, my chest, slow my breathing down. Whatever you need to do. There's a million things to do, but take the pause. Um,
Mm,
don't fight back. Don't lash out. Don't shut down. And then number 2, process it. Ask the questions. What is this emotion telling me? What's coming up? Like Quentin was saying, dive in from secondary emotion to the primary. What am I really feeling? Maybe you do need to communicate something. Maybe you need to set a boundary. Maybe you need to be honest. But until you pause, I can guarantee you that 99% of the time, it's not going to go well without that pause. So pause, process, and then proceed. Figure out, choose your response. What do you need to take responsibility for? What do you need to communicate? What do you need to share? And really, ask yourself, we're all grown adults here. What's a mature action that I can take to create connection and create emotional safety in my marriage?
mm. Dude,
So,
so well said. Thank you for sharing that,
yeah.
Lucas. So pause, process, proceed. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Anything you want to add?
yeah, I just want to add this last thought too, just because I feel this is so important. Just be careful of all the cultural messaging out
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to say, show me the fruit of somebody's life. Forget what anybody says. Just look at the fruit of their lives, because I see a lot of people out there that promote things like that are, kind of contrarian to what we're saying. Like, oh, just like your feelings are truth, and do and it's like all this, and then it's like, well, does that person have a successful relationship? No.
Hmm.
They don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of messaging out there
Hmm.
that sounds like it's going to be good for you, that sounds like it's going to be good for your relationship. But the people that are promoting it and the people that are saying it are just total failures when it comes to being successful in a relationship. So just be careful, okay? Because there's a lot of sound bites on TikTok, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
sound bites on Instagram, and there's a lot of sound bites on people that are even podcasting, but they're not successful, okay? So just make sure that you're getting really good wisdom from people who are kind of really living this stuff out, because the truth is anybody can say anything.
Hmm.
And I think that more than ever, we just have to be so careful to we have to be so careful that we're just not consuming messaging that makes us feel good in the moment, but ends up wreaking havoc in our lives. And there's so much of that out there.
That is such a good reminder. Absolutely. So if you guys ever want to talk, chat, shoot us a message on Instagram. You can go to blackbelthusband.com. We'd love to engage. If you have any questions or if this resonated with you and you want to take a deeper dive, we're here for you guys.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Lucas. Okay, guys, talk soon. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Belt Husband podcast. If today's episode gave you a new insight or a challenge to raise your standard, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another man who's ready to lead stronger at home. Your marriage doesn't change by accident. It changes because you show up leading different. Keep going, and I'll see you inside the next episode.